Marianne Williamson, and welcome to the Citizen Campaign Call. So glad that you're here. And we have a very special guest tonight. And Andrew, hi, I'm really glad that you're here with us.
Well, it's a thrill to be here, and thank you so much for including me, Marianne. I've been a huge admirer of yours and your teachings and your work for a long time, so thank you so much.
Thank you. Well, it is a real mutual admiration society, and I want everybody to know about your book. It's called The War on Normal People: The Truth About America's Disappearing Jobs and Why Universal Basic Income is Our Future. Andrew is the other candidate, announced candidate in the campaign, who I think of as a genuinely disruptive force. He is talking about the kind of thing, much as we are, the things that actually speak not only to a political conceptualization of what has been, but a political conceptualization that involves what is going to be. So I'm not quite finished with Andrew's book, but it has been deeply impactful to me. And I wanted him to come on because I want him to talk to you. I want to hear questions answered myself. I knew about the concept of universal basic income. We all know kind of basically the concept because it's sort of in the air. But until I read this book, I didn't understand the fuller implications, not only of what this means, but of what's happening in our economy and what's going to be happening. So if it's okay, Andrew, I'm gonna just start asking you some questions, okay? Because I think some people who are on the call are already big fans of the concept, and I think a large part of, I know from my campaign, and I assume for yours as well, we're not going to navigate these times by just sending somebody to Washington with the idea that they're gonna fix things. We need the American mind to wake up. And that means a lot of the subjects that we had sort of farmed out. You know, I keep saying you can't farm out your conscience, you can't farm out your better thinking. And I think we can't farm out our economic thinking at this point, particularly since our economic system is so much a part of this relic of 20th century old think. So that's why the average citizen has to make thoughts about economics now part of our sense of what it means to be a good citizen, because any public issue will get to our private door. And what I really got very clearly reading your book is that this tsunami of job destruction that will be created by automation is already happening. And I think it's like so many other things. Oh, it's happening, it's just not happening in your neighborhood yet. But according to you, man, it's coming big time in the next 5, 10, 15 years. So I'm gonna go right into it if it's okay with you and ask you some questions, okay?
Oh yeah, that'd be phenomenal. And I agree with everything you just said. It's all true.
Okay, so first of all, where did the basic idea, I know from reading up about this and doing research on it, the idea of universal basic income has been around for a while, tried in other countries in various ways. Can you give us a little bit of history of the whole concept of universal basic income?
Yeah, so universal basic income has been with America since the founding of the country. Thomas Paine was for it. He called it the citizen's dividend. Decades later, Martin Luther King was for it and championed it before he was assassinated in 1968. Milton Friedman and 1,000 economists signed a study saying this would be great for America. And it even passed the US House of Representatives twice in 1971 under Richard Nixon. And the policy is simply that everyone in the country is guaranteed a certain amount of money free and clear to meet our basic needs. And if that seems dramatic or impossible, in 1982, one state actually passed a dividend where now everyone in Alaska gets between $1,000 and $2,000 a year, no questions asked, from oil money. They call it the oil check. And it was passed by a Republican governor in a deep red state. And now it's wildly popular. And so my message is that what Alaska did with oil money, we can do for the rest of the country with technology money. And as you said, Marianne, none of this is speculative anymore. We have been in the midst of an automation wave that has already displaced 4 million manufacturing workers in the Midwest and the South, which in my mind led to Donald Trump winning the election in 2016. So I like to frame this conversation with a couple of numbers. 32% of Americans graduate from college. So the vast majority of workers are high school graduates or people who attended perhaps 1 year of college. And so if you think about the most common jobs in the US economy, they are filled by high school graduates. And we all know this just walking around, like you said, in the airport or in the mall. The most common jobs in the US economy are administrative and clerical work, which includes call center workers. That's number one. Number two is retail workers and sales clerks, all the people that work as cashiers, and store attendants is number 2. Number 3 is food service and food preparation. Number 4 is truck driving and transportation. And number 5 is manufacturing. I just named half of American jobs. And you can see that in each category, they're going to shrink a lot. Administrative and clerical work includes call center workers and customer service reps. Now, when we all call and get a customer service bot, it irritates us and we keep pounding the button until we get a human. We're all like, give me a human, give me a human. But in about 2 or 3 years, the bot will actually be indistinguishable from a human. They'll be using voice prompts that have been programmed in, and you'll feel like you're having a conversation with a real person, and it's just an AI attendant. There are 2.5 million Americans who work as call center workers right now. They make about $14 an hour. So that number is going to shrink a lot. 30% of American malls are going to close in the next 4 or 5 years because Amazon is sucking up $20 billion in e-commerce every year. And now malls don't have anyone visiting them. And if you've been to a mall lately that's not in a very, very affluent area, you'll see it's half empty or in some cases on the verge of failure. So that those jobs are filled by like the average retail worker is a 39-year-old woman making between $11 and $12 an hour. And we know most Americans do not have a ton of savings. So when those malls and Main Street stores close, their prospects are going to be very unclear. So those are 2 that are incredibly obvious. And unfortunately, those affect the largest job categories in the country.
Okay, slow down here a little bit because I want to make sure that everybody's really with us here. So you're talking about people who make between $10 and $11 an hour. And you're talking about the fact that automation is going to get rid of those jobs. And as you say in the book, you make a compelling case for the fact there will not be other jobs for them to find because any of the jobs in kind of lateral positions will also be automated out.
Yeah, right? That's right. If your mall closes, it's not like there'll be another group of stores opening in that community that are going to need clerks. Generally, if a mall closes, it means that other stores might be closing too. And so there's not going to be a really easy transition for many of these workers. And if you look at the numbers right now, already Americans are moving for work at lower rates than we have in decades. So our ability to transition is going down even as the need is going up.
How many millions of Americans are you talking about here?
According to the Federal Reserve, 44% of American jobs fall into one of 2 categories: repetitive manual or repetitive cognitive. And those are the jobs that are potentially at least subject to automation in the next 10, 15 years. And so that number, as a raw number, 44% of total jobs, is approximately 65 million jobs. Now, I'm not suggesting that we're going to automate away 65 million jobs in this time frame. Just because it's potentially automatable doesn't mean we're going to do it. But a significant proportion of those jobs are going to disappear. And one of the things I tell people when I'm traveling the country, it's like, look, it's not like a robot is going to walk onto Main Street and take the job of the sales clerk. But what is going to happen is that the store is going to close because Amazon is sucking up all the commerce out of our communities. And if you go to the Amazon fulfillment center, there the robots are. So when you talk about automation, some people don't put 2 and 2 together. But if you have a company like Amazon that's worth $1 trillion and has unlimited capital to spend on trying to sell things at the lowest cost and automating the processes, then over time you end up putting 30% of Main Street stores out of business.
So one of the things you talk about in the book is the fact that so many of the big tech moguls support UBI because they're very clear that this is coming.
Yes.
And our political establishment, too much of the conversation that dominates the political establishment, and I think this speaks to your candidacy and mine, speaks to this kind of late 20th century political and economic reality and solutions that speak to problems that are extensions of the late 20th century and which in their own way only either perpetuate those problems or even worse, in some cases, are completely inadequate to deal with the problems that are coming. So UBI, the whole idea of UBI is because of this massive tsunami that is coming. Now, what concerns me is the human despair that is created by chronic economic tension. And I don't think that we would have Donald Trump, actually, and I think you said something similar a few minutes ago. I don't think Trump would have been elected had there not been so many people just desperate for something that might change their circumstances.
Yes.
Large groups of desperate people are dangerous. They're a national security risk, whether they're in a corner of a city of America or another corner of the world, because desperate people do desperate things. Desperate people are vulnerable to ideological capture by genuinely psychotic forces, whether it has to do with a gang or it has to do with a terrorist organization overseas. But also, as was the case in Nazi Germany, in the prelude to Nazi Germany, so much of the economic despair that was a product of endless, the sort of Deutschmark till we tell you to stop, that were reparations from the Allies to Germany after World War I, created a situation where when you have this many people living in despair, this becomes dangerous because they're willing to do anything and go with anyone who could possibly help them. So what I want people to understand from you is, what is this going to look like? And in what ways will this kind of a wave, this kind of job-destroying tsunami affect the situation that we have now, and also stretch not just to the limit, but beyond the limit, the systems we have in place right now to absorb that level of economic pain?
Yes, and that's what galvanized me to run. I mean, you and I are very much aligned, Marianne, where we're in the third inning of the greatest economic and technological transformation in the history of the country, what some are calling the fourth industrial revolution. And the third inning has brought us Donald Trump. By the time you get to self-driving cars and trucks displacing millions of truck drivers, and artificial intelligence taking jobs that used to be filled by accountants and lawyers, I mean, the despair you're describing is going to be staggering. It's going to be unbelievable. And that, to me, is why we need a huge rebalancing of the economy. And the universal basic income, the freedom dividend of putting $1,000 a month into people's hands, it does not solve the problem. I don't have any illusions about that. But what it does is it helps create the conditions for a meaningful reconstitution of paths of purpose and structure and fulfillment for more Americans. But the economic groundwork right now is not there. If you're living in rural America and the vitality is leaving and your neighbor's addicted to drugs, like, you have a very, very limited path forward, and you might not have the resources to make any significant adjustments. And so in my mind, a universal basic income is something that would only be necessary if we were in this kind of position. But unfortunately, we're here. When I dug into the numbers, I was shocked. We already have a labor force participation rate that's close to a multi-decade low. Right now, our labor force participation rate is at 63.2%, the same level as Ecuador or Costa Rica in terms of international comparables. Nothing against those nations, but those aren't exactly the role models you want in terms of workforce engagement. And 1 out of 5 prime working age American men right now is out of the workforce, and we're in year 10 of an expansion. So the displacement that you would expect in the third inning of this automation wave is already here, as are signs like opiate overdoses and a huge surge in suicides among middle-aged Americans who are having trouble finding new places in the economy. And so, to me, we need to reshape this economy around human beings as fast as possible. And our government has a limited set of tools in many respects. It's one reason why I admire your run so much, is that you believe that we need a spiritual awakening, which I completely agree with. And for me, my lens is as an entrepreneur and business person. So I'm seeking to change the capital flows in our country. And if we put more money into people's hands, then it has a byproduct of making our children healthier, our families stronger, strengthening people's mental health and sense of the future, hopefully helping keep families and relationships together, and then laying again the groundwork for us to have really like meaningful and impactful solutions so that people have a path forward.
Okay, so we have the largest income inequality since 1929. And this, Louis Brandeis, the late Supreme Court Justice, said you can have large amounts of money in the hands of a very few, or you can have democracy. You cannot have both. So that's very clear to me. And it's very clear to me that it is an assault that an economic system that places advocacy for short-term profits for huge multinational corporations before advocacy for the well-being of the people of our country, the people of the world, and the planet on which we live is amoral at best, immoral at worst. It is completely untethered to any kind of ethical and moral consideration. I understand that. And I understand that a sociopath is someone who has no concern about anyone but itself, and that this is basically a sociopathic kind of economic functioning. And I understand that our government has basically become handmaiden to that economic system. I understand this has been going on for 40 years. I understand that it has turned our government into a legalized form of bribery. Okay, got all that. And one of the reasons why I'm running is because I understand we need to do a quick and a massive infusion of hope. Because people cannot soar when there are constant stress and struggle. I believe that unleashing the spirit of the American people is the way to transform our economy and to transform our society. So I understand immediate need for a Medicare for all type of healthcare system. I understand the immediate need to cancel the vast majority, if not all, of these college loans. I understand the immediate need to create a system where you can have a four-year community college or state university education. And I understand that these things pay for themselves because every dollar that you put into education or every dollar that you put into removing the shackles that are binding people's hearts unbinds their creativity. I understood all that. Please explain to me, in your view, why in addition to those things, I think I know the answer. Well, first of all, I'm going to tell you what I think based on reading your book, the answer is, and you tell me if I'm right. So if we have universal, and also a Green New Deal.
Sure.
If we have a Green New Deal and we have the canceling of most of those college loans, or at the very least the extension of those payments in much better terms, if we have the free college, and if we have universal health care, then my thought was, well, why would we need this? And you will tell me if my answer is correct. The part of me that thinks this is possibly still needed is that what you are describing is coming down at us so fast. It's like a tsunami that's right here that we're not seeing. It's like until the tsunami hits, you only have a few minutes. And so my concern is that universal health care, free college, a Green New Deal could not be revved up quickly enough to be a buffer against this massive wave of despair that would be brought about by this automation, and that with a UBI system, we could immediately infuse this kind of hope into the system. I've lost your picture. I hope you're coming back. I don't know what happened. Is somebody bringing him back? Oh, he's sideways. Well, hopefully and you're lying on top of my head. The whole thing is rather comical. Between that and the dogs and the policeman who came while we were having this conversation, whatever, hopefully they're fixing this somewhere in the back. But in the meantime, people are still certainly listening to you, and maybe they're going like this. Am I right about why we might still need UBI? Please tell me. I want to know.
I apologize in that, like while I got beamed out, I think I missed your your rationale, but I'm sure we're in agreement on this. I mean, I have worked in technology and business for a number of years now, and the reason why we need UBI is, one, we're making all these changes in the workforce in real time over a vast number of families and situations, and so it's going to be very hard to have some sort of directed resources. But the other thing is that the dynamics of this economy are increasingly winner take all and punitive to the vast majority of Americans. And so unless you directly put economic resources into their hands, something like free community college, if they're already, let's say, 49 years old, and their truck driving job's about to disappear, like some of the measures that you would put in place as aspects of a progressive regime aren't going to reach certain people that are going to need it the most. And the other thing about it is, like you said about unleashing hope in the American spirit, is that if we have this universal basic income that's a right of citizenship that everyone's proud of and everyone feels entitled to, then that would have, if anything, like a human impact that's worth even as much or more than the money. I'm going to see if I can reorient my screen.
Yeah, I'm hoping. David, can someone talk to me about it? Somebody's working on this. My friend David is here. I'm so sorry. So you try, and David, are they working on this? Okay, but let me, and I also want to take something on about what you just said. Some people say, well, if you give people money, then they won't work. Well, certainly, first of all, this money will not be enough that people can just say, okay, I don't have to live on, make a living. But also, I totally don't believe that punitive measures, and basically what our economic system amounts to now is one big punitive measure. I don't believe that inspires people. I think what motivates people is kindness. I think when you feel that the society is on your side and wants you to succeed, to me, people who help me because they want me to succeed inspires me to succeed. And I think there's a psychological, once again, we need an integrative approach to politics where we realize that how people feel is a large part of this. People feeling so left out of the economy, like they just don't matter, like their lives just don't matter, like many of the people that you've described. And also you said something a couple of minutes ago that you also say in the book that I had read before, but elsewhere, but it's very significant. And that is that even though there have been a lot of job training programs where we have sought to give people who lost their jobs training in other jobs, most of the time we don't have the jobs for people to go to even after we have retrained them. So the evidence is pretty in that that's not really working. So we can't just retrain people who have lost all these jobs. We have to form a bridge for these people to get their lives together. Is that correct as you see it?
Yeah, that's exactly right. The data around government-funded retraining programs is abysmally poor. Success rates of between 0 and 15%. And if you think about it objectively, if you have a 49-year-old man who's driven a truck or worked in a manufacturing plant for 20 years, the odds of your being able to retrain and reskill them for something in their community, the odds are not that high, particularly if you're the employer and you have a choice between a 50-year-old former trucker or manufacturing worker and a 25-year-old young person coming out of community college who might have lower salary expectations, who might have more current skills. And so the retraining programs have not worked. And when politicians talk about them, it actually angers me because I feel like they're doing us a disservice because they're presenting to the American people that there is an answer, there is a solution, when anyone who takes any time looking at it would realize that it's a solution that's going to meet maybe 0 to 15% of the problem.
And it's really the people that get left out the most are older people and children. Those are the ones that are the least served. I think a lot of younger people might not realize. Well, of course, you see these college loans, the fact that the average college graduate, 70% of these kids who are graduating from college now have an average of something like $28,000 in debt. So it's not like anyone is doing well from the kind of economic system that we have. And if all we do is water the leaves, we're not really getting down to the roots. We need these fundamental changes.
I couldn't agree more. We have to tear this system up from the roots, from the very roots of it. Build a trickle-up economy around human beings and families and communities. And I just had a vision, Marianne. It's really beautiful what you said about how people want to feel like someone cares about them. Imagine if there was a President Wilson or a President Yang who said, look, you're a citizen, we love you, you're part of our country, and here's $1,000 because it's yours, it belongs to you, and let's find a new direction together. I mean, that would be essentially the exact opposite of what people are getting right now, where they feel like their government and their society has left them behind.
You know, it's interesting though, Andrew, because I have found, and I'm even seeing it now on this campaign, I'm seeing it with the whole reparations conversation. The status quo perpetuates and protects itself by co-opting disruptive language. So I think we already have traditional candidates talking about love and talking about morality and stuff like that. So it's got to be more than just the words. It's got to be some of the more fundamental changes. And that gets into, of course, you and me as candidates. And I think it's clear to everyone the ways in which, you know, they turn on television and they see who's running. And so many of the mainstream, even cable shows, will show the pictures of people who haven't even announced an exploratory, but will not show the pictures of you and me. And I think this is why, right? Because we're talking about things that would literally disrupt the fundamental economic patterns that have brought us to where we are. And I feel that a better version of the same old is not going to take us where we need to go. And one of the things that I feel reading your book is that this is a massive problem. Am I going too far to say that this kind of a situation, as you see it, could really be bringing forth in the next few years something worse than just a bad recession? The way you describe it in your book, I fear we could be headed for something worse than just a bad recession. I don't want to even use the D word, but this could become catastrophic. Is that true as you see it?
Unfortunately, it is true, Marianne. And if you reflect on our recent past, when the financial crisis was in full bloom in 2008 and people were worried about the financial system imploding, and then they printed $4 trillion and shoved it to the banks. And then the banks have then used that money to inflate speculative bubbles in private company stocks like Uber and Airbnb and in coastal real estate. And a lot of that money has not gone into the hands of everyday Americans. I mean, we're still living on that particular bailout to this day. And when this next recession does hit, unfortunately, it's going to get compounded by the fact that many of these technologies are just now available that are going to make it easier for companies to get rid of thousands of call center workers, thousands of back office workers, thousands of retail employees. And so the next downturn, which is going to be upon us some point pretty soon, because we're in year 10 of an expansion now, and traditionally expansions last somewhere closer to 8 years, generally speaking. So we're due for a recession, but this recession is going to be nasty and compounded by many, many other factors, including the fact that technology has come a long way in the last 10 years.
Okay, so let's say you're president, or let's say I'm president and you're working with me. And what do we do immediately? And you have a Congress that goes along with this. What does that look like? How does it get done? And the proverbial question, how do you pay for it?
Yeah, so some of the things that you described would be the first steps. You would forgive a significant proportion of student loan debt because that would be an economic stimulus. People would have more money to spend on new houses, starting families, starting new businesses, et cetera, et cetera. I would put money directly into the hands of the American people in the form of a freedom dividend. And the great thing about it is that we get a lot of that money back because Americans will spend the vast majority of that money right in their local economies. It's going to go to the local hardware store and tutoring service and restaurant and garage for car repairs. And that money is going to circulate through the economy and help create and support jobs that people can actually access. We're going to do the opposite, essentially, of the Wall Street bailout. Because again, they printed $4 trillion and just shoved it to the banks. We're going to take money and direct it to us, the owners and shareholders, the citizens of this country. It's going to be a trickle up economy instead of a trickle down economy. In terms of how you pay for it, to me, the big move we have to make is we have to put the American people in position to gain from artificial intelligence and self-driving trucks and the rest of it. And so you probably saw a headline that Amazon paid zero in federal taxes last year, despite record profits. And that is the problem. The big winners are going to be the biggest tech companies in the world, and the biggest tech companies are experts at just not paying a whole lot of tax. So that's the trap we're in, that work and value is going to get soaked up by a handful of mega tech companies. And the American people are going to look around saying, where did the money go? Where did the money go? So what we have to do is we have to put in place a value-added tax, which would get the American people a slice of every Amazon purchase, every Facebook ad, every robot truck mile. And because our economy is now so vast at $20 trillion a year, up $5 trillion in the last 12 years, if we had a value-added tax at even half the European level, it would generate $800 billion in new revenue, which would be enough with current spending and cost savings and value gains from having a stronger, healthier, better educated, more productive population to pay for a dividend of $1,000 per month per adult, which would help rebuild many, many local Main Street economies. So that's what President Yang would do when the recession hits. And unfortunately, the recession will hit. Hopefully you and I are in the White House having this conversation again, Marianne.
So let me ask you, why is it that you think that we did not prosecute any of the white collar people who were responsible for what happened in 2008?
Well, the legal standards for criminal prosecution of those types of acts are very, very tricky to prove. You literally have to find some sort of intent according to the current law. But I'm convinced that the rage America felt towards the people who crashed the economy never was satisfied, because we know no one went to jail. And those people did so much harm to so many people, so many families, that there needed to be some kind of penance or justice, but they all skated, and they all just looked around and were like, well, who could know? Even though they were paid hundreds of millions of dollars to know that exact thing. So our legal code was not up to the challenge. And this is happening again now with technologies overrunning various industries, where our antitrust laws are too out of date to account for Facebook and Google and Amazon just totally taking over entire industries. And so that's why people didn't go to jail, Marianne, is that the laws on the books weren't designed for that.
Well, wait a
and our
minute.
government just wasn't up to the challenge.
When you say that our antitrust laws are too out of date, it's not my impression that the antitrust laws are too out of date. It's that there is an attitudinal preference for simply not prosecuting antitrust laws anymore. That the same system that we're talking about here.
That is partially true. But the reason why antitrust laws are out of date is that they're designed to protect against monopolies raising prices on consumers. And the way technology works now is that Amazon would never dream of raising prices. They actually undersell and undercut everyone and put everyone else out of business. And then they look at regulators and say, I didn't raise prices on anyone. And then the regulators are like, you're right, that's our entire test. And so we need a new test that accounts for the realities of the 21st century.
Right. So I want everybody who is watching this to know that Andrew and I, you know, obviously we're having a conversation which is somewhat different than the conversation being had by many of the traditional candidates. Andrew and I have a bar that we have to reach in order to be in the DNC debates. And both of us, that's true for every candidate, has to have 65,000 individual contributors. That means even if you go to, what is it, Yang 2020, Andrew?
Yep, that's right.
Okay, Yang 2020, or if you go to Marianne 2020, give Andrew $1, give me $1. Give more if you can, and if you feel like it, of course, we would both love it. But even $1, which will make you an individual contributor on his campaign and an individual contributor on my campaign, so that both of us can be part of the debate, the DNC debates. So what questions, Andrew, do you have for me?
You know, I would just love to hear how your experience on the trail has been in Iowa and New Hampshire, because I feel like you and I are spending time in some of the same places. and I was very curious, because I've been having the experiences I've been having, but I see what I see obviously promotional materials for your appearances, and really what your take has been spending time with people in both of the early states. And it seems you might be moving to Iowa sometime in the next number of days and weeks, which I think is wonderful. Like, I'm going to be spending a lot of time there. So I feel like, you and I are going to be in the same places an awful lot.
We will be. We'll meet for lunch. I find, and I'm sure you do too, but I think other people are interested to know this. People in these early states, Iowa, New Hampshire, South Carolina, and Nevada. Now, I haven't made my trip to Nevada as part of the campaign yet. I don't know if you have. They take their role very seriously because they are the early primary and caucus states. And who they vote for is going to determine our political conversation and possibly our political reality for years to come. So they're listening very intently. And what I find, Andrew, is that it's very moving. Because whereas you see mainstream media and they care about who's a senator or congressman, somehow, people in Iowa and New Hampshire, they're not overly impressed by anything. They're really listening to what you have to say. So I have found it exhilarating because I find, first of all, I feel that the American people are smarter than a lot of the political establishment thinks they are. I find the American people more noble than the political establishment thinks that they are. And I think that the American people, I believe that in 2016, there was a desire for change. There was either going to be a progressive populism, such as a Bernie Sanders, or an authoritarian populism, such as Mr. Trump. But there was going to be a cry of populist despair. And it was difficult, I think, for a candidate who spoke of keeping things the way they were. I think that was a strategy on her part that was tone deaf to what was really rumbling underneath the surface. I think that the desire for change was legitimate because people are experiencing everything that you've been talking about here tonight. And even though the change agent we got was what millions of us think is the worst kind of change, the desire for change is still there. And I feel that in Iowa and New Hampshire and South Carolina. Is that your experience as well?
It is. I also have been exhilarated and touched, and the people are very reflective and good and thoughtful and take their responsibilities very, very seriously. My team and I have joked that we have a much better time just as human beings in some of the early states than we do shaking the money tree with the rich folks on the coast. Because it just feels like a more human conversation. And like you said, the people there are just interested in you, who you are as a human being, what your vision is. And when they meet with, I'm sure that it's 100% the case with you, and it's the case with me, where they meet with you and there's like a sizing up process where they're like, what are you doing here? And then as soon as they realize that you're genuinely there to help, then there's like this incredible generosity of spirit, like this openness. And I know, I mean, for you, everyone knows you're there to help, like immediately, like, that would be evident. In my case, there's a little bit of a getting to know you, and then they realize that I'm there to help.
Well, I also think there's a lot of coastal arrogance, a lot of people who feel, well, I get it, but they won't get it, and
I can't tell you how many times I've heard that, and it's like, what do you think? Like, they don't understand what's going on in their communities? Of course they get it.
Yeah. And I also think that people are more ready for genuine disruption. People who are living the majority of their lives in the 21st century, and in some cases, all of their lives in the 21st century, should not be burdened by the prejudices of 20th century, particularly late 20th century, politics and economics. I'm old enough to remember there was a time when a corporation was expected to have a moral and ethical sense of responsibility to the worker and to the environment, and to the community, not just fiduciary responsibility to their stockholders. You have generations now who don't even remember when there was such a time. They were brought up with this big brother of multinational corporate conglomerates. And so we have to break the chokehold of this mesmerization. That's why I love Lincoln's line, as our case is new, we must think anew and act anew. And that's why I think so much of the traditional, and they're good people running it. I'm not running against anyone, I'm running with everyone. Obviously, you and I are both here. But there is a conversation that dominates traditional politics and that purports to be where we have to go. But the mindset
Yes.
that got us into this ditch is not the mindset that's going to get us out. And people living, you talk in your book a lot about people who are living in a certain bubble. And my career and my life experience has always had me up close and personal with human grief and human despair and human pain and sorrow. And I have seen something, and this is one of the reasons your book speaks to me. Something has changed in the last 20 years. The despair factor. The amount of money you have to be able to breathe easy in this society today, and how much people have to struggle on a daily basis to have the amount of money to just breathe easy, which puts people in survival mode. And then
all the time.
Nobody can do their best. And then everything that comes from that, including addiction, including domestic violence, and it's so stupid, really. Because
it's so unnecessary.
It's unnecessary.
So unnecessary. We can take the boot off of people's throats if we just get a hold of the levers of power, truly.
And it's not the way to plan for a good economy 10 or 20 years from now.
No.
It's the way to plan catastrophe, really, because it's a lesion from the future. It has nothing to do with good economic planning. No. And so we have to completely revamp our thinking. We're this 200-year-old economic thinking, who controls the means of production, and which it should be the state, or should it be the private sector? That whole capitalist versus socialist thing, which is kind of like left versus right. It's wording that doesn't even help us. We need to break through the filters. But yes, I mean, it does. These words aren't even helpful anymore.
Yes.
But instead, I think we have to think of money as coming from that which is inside us.
Yes.
People want to do good. People want to create. People want to produce. You look at these kids who are stuck. I can't even imagine what it would be like to be 20 years old and stuck with $28,000 of college loan. All these kids want to do is be out there, be in the free market, be entrepreneurs, but we're not letting them have access to the capital that would enable them to do that. So anything you can do that unleashes the spirit, like you said, take the boot out. And that's why I'm hearing the whole UBI conversation in a way that I had not before. And I want to before we get off, I want to share something. Somebody on my team said, "Why are you inviting a competitor in this campaign to be on the citizen campaign call?" And I said, that right there is old think. That's the enemy here, is old think and zero-sum game. And this is not about strategy. This is about the Shakti, the miracles, the energy that will emerge from fierce and authentic truth-telling. And if somebody's doing some fierce and authentic truth-telling, I want to be an ally. I want to work with you. And so I'm really glad, and I do hope we'll have lunch in Iowa. And
we 100% are going to have lunch in Iowa on me. But you are a champion for humanity, Marianne. I'm a parent. I've got 2 young boys, one of whom is autistic. And I'm doing this because I can see clearly the country they're going to inherit, and it is not one we're going to be proud of. And I know you're driven by the exact same things. And I want to work with you. I want to work with anyone who wants to solve these problems. I'm very much on the record saying, look, I don't care about the seating chart. I just want to get the job done. And they're going to be, I'm happy to say, a group of us coming together to try and save this country for the next generation. It's going to be a massive challenge. And the institutionalization you talked about in our politics and also the media, it's very much there. But there's such an appetite for disruption of both of those things. And I agree with you that it's going to be the 2 of us that are leading that charge.
So everybody, as I said, even $1, go to Yang 2020, go to Marianne 2020, and anything you can do to allow both Andrew and myself to be in these debates so that we can be part of the larger conversation. The institutional support, I love all the people, the candidates who are saying, oh, I'm not going to take corporate money, but they have so much corporate money already in their coffers, they don't need any more.
Yeah.
I think people underestimate, boy, there's a mentality of the gatekeeper, both in our institutional politics and in our media. But grassroots, that's what grassroots campaigns are all about. So if you feel that you have enjoyed this conversation, if you feel that I'm contributing something meaningful to this campaign, if you feel that Andrew is contributing something meaningful to this campaign, I hope you will help us override the financial and institutional forces that make it harder for people like ourselves to get out there. And it's too late to just try to change the conversation. We need to change the country. So please go to Andrew 2020, no, Yang 2020, go to Marianne 2020, give $1, be one of those 65,000 individual contributors he needs, be one of the 65,000 individual contributors that I need. Shout it from the mountaintop, whatever it is you believe in. And I hope, and this is why I'm so glad we had this conversation, Andrew, I feel very strongly, as I'm sure you do too. This isn't about somebody who gets it, who's going to go to Washington. This has got to be a massive uprising of consciousness among the American people. One of the things that I've noticed online, and you probably have too, is once again how smart people are. The conversations people are having about things like universal basic income. So I hope that for all of you out there, I hope that this expanded your thinking, deepened your questioning, and exposed you to some of the better ideas that could actually navigate these times and lead us to a much, much better future. Any last words, Andrew, for you?
Well, I just want to say thank you. I want to echo Marianne that please do give to Marianne 2020 or Yang 2020 or
not or and.
And yes, and 100% and also that there is another way for Marianne and I to make the debates. The donation threshold is going to be much easier to count and monitor, and so I think Marianne's 100% right to focus on and emphasize it. But the other way is for us to be polling at 1% or higher in 3 polls, either nationally or in early states. So if you have friends in Iowa, send them to see Marianne speak. If you have friends in New Hampshire, let them know about our campaigns. That's another way you can help us get on the debate stage. I would say job number 1 is that donation and get your friends to donate. That's going to be much more direct. But then if you have friends, particularly in the early states, let them know, because if we poll above a certain level, then we also can make the debate stage that way. And Marianne needs to be there, and I need to be there, so let's make it happen.
Thank you. Much love to you, Andrew, and to all of you who are listening. I know you stayed with us through the policeman coming in. And
thank you for that.
But we made it.
And my prison background. I'm in my bedroom hiding from my 3-year-old. So you know how it is, parents out there.
I hope to meet your children someday.
Yeah. I'm bringing them to Iowa, so you can't miss them. I'll bring them to lunch.
Okay, cool. But you're not moving to Iowa, right?
No, I'm not. But there's a spring break in April, and my family's coming with me. So during that time, you'll meet them for sure during that break.
I look forward to meeting your family. God bless.
Have a great night, Marianne. Everyone else, thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone. Much love. Bye-bye.